Divine rising, love, peace, and abundance to all. Download, download, download. Genetics, spiritual gifts, karma, collective karma, golden age, silver age, copper age, dark age, confluence age, biblical, Quran, Middle Eastern, Asiatic, right? Follow me. Ancestors, bloodline, DNA, souls, right? Souls never die. Incarnation, reincarnation. So what's been coming to me is is this, and it's been coming to me for a while. It's like I don't take notes, but it all gets stored in my brain from different sources. And once it's all stored in my brain as data, after it's stored, then it starts to connect the dots, right? So everything that I say isn't like a direct message that just came to me. What is the direction message that comes from me is the connection when it does connect. So I'm gonna put it like this. Years ago when I was deep into researching the scripture and I got deep into the bloodline and genetic that was stored in my brain, right? About the curses of certain bloodlines, the blessings of certain bloodlines, the characteristics and traits of certain bloodlines, right? So just say I received this information through study 10 years ago. Now, in this present time, the number 12 and 13 keep coming across, keep coming across. Masculine and feminine keep coming across. Sun and moon, up and down, light and dark keep coming across. Balance keeps coming across. Then I might run into something that may trigger something that I studied, but now it brings it together. Not just through study, but through experience, right? So as we know, right, our bloodline, our genes are carried longer than we can imagine, longer than we can even count, right? Some of the genes that we carry, the cosmic genes, the spiritual genes, and what I mean by that when I say spiritual genes is the things that the soul carry, right, through each carnation, right? So what came to me was that all of us, everybody on the planet, everybody in this plane has some type of karma, right? Whether you created this lifetime, a past lifetime, or is, well, when I say past lifetime, the soul, whatever debt that you created in those times, right? We not only have our independent karma, but we also have a collective karma. This collective karma comes through our tribes, our soul tribes, the origin of our DNA, right? And all of this started running across my mind first when I started to realize that actually melanated copper beings had been and populated every inch of this planet, right? And I learned that reading this book by Dr. Supreme called Black Gods. And it actually revealed how every religion, right, no matter what culture, no matter what skin complexion, every religion was actually started through melanated beings, right? And it was revealing how in Catholics, it was revealing how in ancient China, it was revealing how in ancient India, it was revealing how in Mesoamerica, it was revealing how the Mayans, Aztecs, it was revealing how all of these religions and cultures all stem to melanated beings, travelers, right? And basically how all the stories actually align. And when I realized this, it was stored in my brain that even in these old ancient temples, most of the deities that they have was actually dark, right? And that they learned through these travelers going to different populations, going to different lands, and actually having these spiritual gifts. This how the false worship and false gods came about, because going into these different populations, these melanated beings had gifts that some of these people had never seen before, and then they began to worship them as their god, right? So as I continue to do this, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, it just started hitting me, right? How can, right, a group of beings more powerful mentally, physically, and spiritually of anything on this planet has traveled every part of the planet, right? But are still hated, belittled, shunned, looked down upon on every part of the world, right? How could a people with all this might, light, authority, wisdom be captured? How could they be placed in bondage? How could they not have seen these things coming? And I said it in the chat one time, and this young brother responded. He was like, "We chose to." He said we chose to, so we can alchemize. Now it had came to me basically that there's no darkness without light. There's no light without darkness. Everything was created by God, good, bad, light, dark, by Him, through Him, for Him, or it for its purpose, right? To evolve, right? Because you don't know what light is unless you know what dark is. You don't know what dark is unless you know what light is. You don't know what left is unless you know what right is. You don't know what up is unless you know what down is. You don't know what love is if you don't know what pain is, right? And vice versa. So it started to dawn on me, right, that when you dwell deep into the scripture, for one, that the tribe of Israel are sealed under a blood covenant, right? What blood covenant are the Israelites sealed under? And why do Israelites go through the same thing over and over in all the history that is history, right? Rulership, slavery, rulership, slavery, rulership, slavery, free from bondage, back into bondage, right? Why does this continue to happen on every part of the planet? It also took me to why women suffered when they had so much power, glory, rule, empire. How could they have been so far washed away? And it could not just be simply somebody just saying, oh, man just overpowered women. No, I can't go for that. So the only thing that it explained it to me clearly as day was the Bible. Because when you do read the Bible and you're not reading it from a biased state, You're not reading it from a religious state. You're not reading it from a state of they use this to enslave us. But when you actually reading it with your third eye, right? Some will see, some will not see. Some will hear, some will not hear, right? And that's the only thing that justified and showed me the enslavement of my people over and over again due to what? Disobedience. Now, I looked at it in Black Gods and why I agree with the young brother. I'm not going to say we agreed to alchemize it and we just forgot, but we, if you in the spiritual community, even if you just in biblical text, Quran, whatever it is that you read, one thing that the world agree on is what goes around comes around. What you put in is what you get out. That's one thing that the world can agree on. Whether they say it in the different tones, whether they say it's karma, or you reap what you sow, or laws of attraction, whatever the case may be, it's a universal law, right? So as I thought about this universal law, and I was like, okay, how did my people get enslaved if they had all these spiritual gifts? If they once ruled so much, how could they be captured? How could they be deceived? If they did not have visions, if they did not have dreams, if they did not feel it, they did not feel something was right for an whole people to be captured and enslaved. And what registered me, that is what we put out. So we are hated in every corner of the earth, looked down upon in every corner of the earth, looked at as slaves on every corner of the earth. But we the first ones to populate every corner of the earth. It hit me that because that's what we did. Some might not want to believe it, but all of our ancestors not righteous ancestors. Because we actually populated every corner on the earth and we abused our authority. We abused our power. We enslaved other nations, several other nations, right? We did. We were racist. Because when I read in book Black Gods, I think I read this book in 2015. Black God was explaining that, in ancient Kemet, right, back in these times, that the children of the sun was like, the creme de la creme. The darker you were, the closer you were to God. Because they actually believed in sun worship and that we actually came from the sun, and that's why the sun didn't burn us. We only got darker and we received energy from the sun. And it was explaining that you will look at less than if you was a lighter complexion, right? So when I read that, I was like, whoa, okay. It had already dawned on me that blacks were enslaving blacks when I was digging into the scripture. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. If the tribe of Israel, the brothers went when they went to Egypt and they could not recognize their own brother from the Egyptian and the Israelite, that everybody was black, that everybody looked the same, that Joseph become from a slave to the right hand of Pharaoh and not be recognized as an Israelite upon the Egyptians. So as you continue to look at this, that means that everybody was black and that blacks were enslaving blacks. And then it went into more depth of how the population became more light over time, the bloodlines. So as I look at this, our slavery is our collective karma. That's what our slavery is. And even the ones that were black and enslaved back then, those souls are not the souls that are enslaved now, because those slaves that was way back then already cleared that karmic account. These are our leaders, these are our rulers, these are the people that's in position now, whether it's in a white vessel or a dark vessel. It doesn't matter. These are the ones that when they realize what's going on, they won't too much try to hold bondage, because the soul still holds those old sanskars, right? The soul still holds that. And whether they realize it or not, when they come back and incarnate and they're no longer slaves, they have the urge to enslave others, how they was once in bondage. That's why the scripture tell us, remember when we were in bondage, right? Don't forget when we was in bondage. That way we don't treat people the same way that we were treated when we were in bondage. And why I say about the genetics, the DNA, and the soul, right, is because we know that we have a spiritual realm. We know that we have spiritual gifts. We know that there is some unseen force that moves outside of us as well with inside of us, right? And we know that the bloodline, the genetics never dies. But another thing that was explained to us, that don't get too caught up in the genetics, because God raises kings. The Almighty Creator creates kings, create prophets, create these things. So even though you can be birthed of a royalty bloodline, doesn't mean that you walk, talk, and move with royalty. God can take a bomb and make them royalty, right? Be careful how you treat people, because you never know when you may have entertained angels. Because you see somebody that's on the corner, homeless, begging for food, doesn't mean that God can't raise them to be royalty. So it's a lesson that we must be learning about what is called royal ego, royal body consciousness, right? So with that said, chosen. When you consider yourself a chosen one, a chosen vessel by God, right? You have been chosen from a lineage, or to be incarnated into a lineage that carries certain traumas. They need to be broken or need to be healed, generational things, right? So just say this body that I'm in, I'm birthed into this earth, right? Through two different bloodlines, right? I'm going to go back to the Arawak Indians, right? Because my dad is Jamaican, they might say Taino, but the root is the Arawaks, right? And then on my mother's side was the Cherokees, right? The Cherokee, the American Indian, right? So you got the West Indies, then you got the American Indian. Now, they don't make it seem like that's literally what it is, but what it should be, as they say, America, whatever they call it, right? Is actually the root is the American Indians and the West Indians, right? Then you got the North and the South. Everything, every bloodline was Indian, right? Every bloodline was Indian. Now follow me. So now on the West Indian side, right, my father, and the American Indian side, my mother, right, we have ancestors that did dark work, right? We had ancestors that was righteous. We had ancestors that was warriors. We had ancestors that was healers. We had dark ancestors, right? But in that time was what they needed to do. Now the powers that was possessed, whether dark power or light power, is all embodied in this vessel, right? So the West Indian, the American Indian, right? When you've been chosen, and you having all these battles, right? Because the bloodline on both sides has chosen you. And it wasn't a coincidence that your mother and your father came together. Whether you were a child of a pimp in a hole, whether you're a child of a one night stand, you were called, that energy, that bloodline attracted these two people. People make mistakes, but God don't, right? So when you got these bloodlines that come together and you're a chosen one and you have so much trauma and battles that you have to overcome, you're not just overcoming what you created in this lifetime. You're overcoming everything from your lineage on the left and you overcoming everything from your lineage on the right to create that balance of who you are, that chosen one, right? And when you overcome these battles, what happened is all of these powers are bestowed onto you, right? So the arts that your ancestor that was using, that was dark art, when you overcome those challenges by being bestowed these gifts, because it's gonna seem like certain things coming to you when you're being pulled to the darkness or you're being pulled to the light, right? It's all because the light and the dark run inside your bloodline, and that's point blank period. But I'm talking about your ancestors. Now, when you overcome these things, God finds you a fit vessel to unlock that DNA within yourself. When you unlock that DNA, you unlocking that power, you unlocking that authority. But the things that was once used for darkness to manipulate, to hurt, to harm, to enslave will be used for the light, for righteousness, right? Now, the scripture tell you, right, don't let the curses of the father fall upon the children. But it's also generational curses that fell upon the children as well, right? So when you look at that and you pay attention to it, this is why, again, it tell you don't get too caught up in genetics, because you have certain chosen individuals that, yeah, they walked in righteousness, yeah, they walked in love, but they birthed a seed into this earth that didn't walk according to the laws, that didn't walk according to the scriptures, that didn't walk accordingly to righteousness, and went astray, right? Now, when they go astray, they feel the wrath. Even though the father or the mother was righteous, they created their own karma. But why could somebody be raised the right way, taught the proper way, guided in all the ancient arts, guarded in the light, choose darkness, fall into darkness, right? Because it's not the vessel, it's the soul, right? It's the soul coming into these bodies that has old sand scars, right? Old character traits. So anything could be birthed into a lineage, right? So a person could be birthed into a household of, you know, brokenness, poorness, you know, they could be born into a generation of vipers, a generation of killers, a generation of robbers, drug addicts, right? And this soul can be birthed into this household, but that soul, right, has nothing to do with that lineage. That soul is birthed into the specific lineage, right? Because that soul is on a mission. This is how you realize some people just always been different within their family, because they on a mission to heal that lineage. But Joe, because they going through all these things, right? It's because it's a very powerful lineage, and it's all paying for the karma that was created way, way back then. So when you see these lineages, right? We gonna say in America, right? Because this is where I've been born at. When you see a lineage, right, that everybody, hustlers and drug dealers, they get a lot of money. It seems like things just come to them, right? But they stuck in a cycle, a loop, because there is a royal bloodline, right? When you look at certain families, all family got gold teeth. Like I got different parts of my family, right? I got one part of my family that's this color right here. Then I got another part of my family that's jet black, right? And I got one part of my family that, they straight hustlers. You could look at them, all of them look the same, all of them do the same thing. It's character traits, right? But deep down, both sides of these lineages carry the same type of traumas: anger, lust, addiction, rage. All of them carry the same thing. But it's certain ones that's birthed into these lineages that's here to help guide this ancient bloodline back into righteousness, back into the light. That's what's going on right now to this day. And I'm saying this because when you look at the community, the melanated community that are actually waking up to their soul, that's actually unlocking their DNA, right? Every one of them that are waking up to that, when you pay attention, is all ancient India texts. When you see the women wearing the third eye beanies, the nose rings, when you look at the practices that's going on right now in the melanated community, the ones that are calling themselves woke, the ones that are wearing copper, the ones that are doing these things, right? Most of that comes from, I ain't gonna say it comes from ancient India, because we the ones actually populated ancient India. We are the ones who actually built ancient India. So when they talking about Shiva and Vishnu, all of those names, and I read this way back then, means dark. Krishna means dark. So when you start to look at this and you start to realize when people are waking up, right? It's the same thing that they're doing. They're becoming in tune to nature. They're sun gazing. They're talking about the cosmos. They're aligning to their cosmic family. They're realizing that their DNA, right, and their melanin is connected to something far greater than planet Earth. And they're realizing that the soul doesn't die. These are the ones when they're waking up and they saying they're receiving downloads. It's just tapping in to ancient information, tapping into that DNA, that data that is laid dormant within a vessel, right? And when you do certain practices and you're saying that your ancestors, you're just activating what already lays dormant within you, right? And when you begin to activate what lays dormant within you, you start to remember ancient knowledge. You start to do different things. Again, this is why you know what a real old soul is, right? Again, when I say old souls, majority of the time, when you are a very old soul, you are someone that they would call a jack of all trades. When you are an old soul and you have walked this planet many, many times, you in tune to a lot of different things, different cultures, different religions, different activities. You are in tune to all of these things, right? You are in tune to all of these things. So as I noticed from a child, right? Even as a young child, I was in tune to nature, right? I always noticed different color birds. Everywhere, like I always noticed this. Like I will always know where the melons was growing in the community. I will always know these things. So this is how I came to the realization that uh whatever they want to call it, Obed, Ephi, African spirituality, African practices, whatever, I realized that these things always been a part of my life, right? Because the practices and the things that I begin to remember and the things that I started to identify goes right along with these practices. Like me being attracted to the railroad track and the metal, the nails, me being attracted to hawks, birds, different birds, my first pet ever being a turtle. You know what I mean? And going on the road tracks and seeing birds or going places and the plants are growing, me knowing where the melons grew at, me knowing things that a 3 or 4 year old child should not know. I begin to realize that my soul is very old and I walked these paths before, right? Being attracted to the water. You know what I mean? Just seeing major bodies of water and just want to jump into the water or wondering what's really deep within the water. It has nothing to do with water spirits. A lot of people are misconstruing everything and demonizing everything when everything really is you, right? When you realize where your soul comes from, and when your soul entered to this plane, you'll realize what your mission is. You'll realize why you came, why you were a new soul or old soul, right? And every vessel, I spoke on this before. Every vessel cannot embody every soul. Souls come to particular vessels because of what that vessel carries, correlates with that soul's mission, right? So if you're an old soul, you need to incarnate into a old lineage, right? You need to incarnate into a lineage that carries certain DNA so that soul can, when it fully activate, can actually accomplish its mission on earth because the DNA and genetics carries ancient information, ancient data that the soul needs to correlate with to carry out its mission to elevating humanity, right? So for the ones who are waking up to different conscious levels and states of mind, we must realize we cannot make the same mistakes as our ancestors. The women, the goddesses, can't make the same mistakes that they made once before when they was held in high esteem, right? And that's moving according to lust. That's moving according to power and exercising authority over someone else, right? Because man without woman, masculine without feminine, is chaos, disorder, right? Without chaos, there's nothing for the masculine to bring order to, right? And without the masculine, there's nothing to bring order to the chaos, right? So we both need each other to balance out. So being birthed, we know that that is the feminine aspect, the womb, the primordial womb, right? Is what is the birth from darkness into light, from dark water into light, the visual, right? The sun. Now, when we overstand and understand this, right, we realize that we are birthed from the feminine, the primordial womb, the darkness, right? When we are birthed from the darkness, right, we really don't know what the light is, but we're birthed from the darkness of the womb in the water. Now, when we're birthed from the darkness, the womb, and the water, we have to experience. Now, the logic was birth from the feminine aspect was the masculine. The masculine is right what brought organization, right? That's what brought organization. That's what built. That's what took action, right? While the feminine sat back on her throne, observed, received information from the download, while the masculine took action, right? Now, this was distorted. This became distorted because the feminine aspect was running rampant. The balance was shifted, right? This is why the feminine aspect went down and then the masculine aspect rose, right? But it's all things work in the favor of the Most High. So when the masculine aspect rises, right, they handle things the wrong way. They don't learn the balance of the masculine and the feminine. So now the goddesses, the real goddesses that tapped in, they realized what transpired, right? And in order for things to move forward, we would need balance between the masculine and the feminine, right? So now when the masculine rises up, right? The masculine rises up, they rule, they go through whatever they go through. And now when they go through what they go through and understand that you can't just run a world based on simple logic, everything starts to tumble, right? Now, when everything is tumbling, it seems like the feminine is rising back up. But the true divine feminine realizes that it's not meant to be placed on a pedestal above man, and the real divine masculine realizes not it's not to be placed on a pedestal above women, but it's actually to come back together in harmony and union to establish a new humanity side by side. But it goes even deeper. It's not just establishing humanity side by side. Is first establishing that balance within thyself first, right? The left side of the brain, the right side of the brain, the light and the dark, the moon, the stars, the sun, the moon. However, I'm saying it wrong. But we realize that we must find that within our own vessel first. And I've been saying this for years on years. Man is going to have to learn a lot of this from the feminine, because the feminine has already mastered the art of finding the balance in between the masculine and the feminine. Now, when it comes to that, this is how we break everything. This is how we are able to stand tall. No longer about the relationship, about the woman ain't this and the man ain't that. If everybody took the time to focus on themselves and finding the balance of their masculine and feminine, the left side of their brain, the right side of their brain, which is what unlocks the pineal gland. Once you find balance, that's when your pineal gland unlocks. Your pineal gland is not open if you not have balance, the masculine and the feminine. It's not. Until you develop that, that is the Christ. This is what Jesus was showing us, right? So now, according to living right, righteously, uplifting everybody, finding love within thyself, loving thyself, so you can actually give that full love to the other individuals around you. Now, once you have done this, right, this is how the world is going to elevate. This is how the world is going to evolve. Finding balance between the masculine and the feminine. Now, when it comes to royal DNA, when it comes to royal bloodlines, the Most High is showing us that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can be of a royal lineage, right? But you need to get rid of the ego. So if you are a royal bloodline, right, your vessel is from a royal bloodline. But the soul that's inhabited in that vessel isn't from a royal bloodline. This is how you can see people that have distinguished looks, but it seems like they out their mind, they homeless, they poor, they doing all this. It's because that soul isn't from a royal bloodline, and that vessel is just going through the motion, right? That's carrying all this ancient information, all this ancient data, all of these things is held within inside this vessel, right? But so that we learn the difference between royal ego, right, and what it is to be a soul, these type of things will continue to transpire. Once we realize this is when you're going to start seeing people rise from the ashes. You see like what's going on in Atlanta? Like right now in Atlanta, you see how they doing the homeless people rapping and all that? A lot of that is powerful. A lot of those people are ancient souls. A lot of those vessels probably really, really from royal bloodline. It's just the vessel that's inside that body right now is going through the turmoil. And some souls are incarnated over and over in the same bloodline because he's actually watching over that bloodline. When you see a person that looks like you can track them all the way back to a time and they look like that, that soul has been with that same lineage forever. And it's actually just tracking the bloodline, and it reincarnates back into that bloodline to continue to teach and continue to guide that bloodline back into the light from darkness. But I'm gonna get a little deep on this again. This just laid in on my spirit. If you resonate, if you understand what I'm saying, tap in, share the live, make comments, and maybe we can continue to build on this. Love, peace, and abundance to all. All praise to the Most High Yah. And yes, Christ is real, but we don't need to be arguing about names and see the message. Peace.